Welcome back to Outlaw Operations. Tonight, we're diving into a chilling case filled with deception, greed, and betrayal. A story that seemed to be about love and ambition but ended in tragedy. Before we get into it, take a second to drop a comment. Where are you listening from? And if you enjoy true crime storytelling, hit that like button and subscribe. Now, let's settle in and get started. It was a desperate cry for help, but the night swallowed her pleas. Ashley frantically reached out to Jack's friends using his phone, hoping someone, anyone, would respond. But it was late, and no one saw the messages in time. She even messaged her friends at the church in Chelmsford, attempting to describe the horror that was unfolding. Tragically, by the time they read her messages, it was far too late. Between 12:38 and 12:45 a.m., the nightmare reached its peak. Jack, in a fit of uncontrollable rage, lunged at Ashley, wrapping his hands tightly around her throat. She fought, gasping for air, but he didn't stop, not until she lost consciousness. And even then, he wasn't finished. He stormed into the kitchen, seized an 11-centimeter knife, and returned to where Ashley lay motionless. With a terrifying lack of hesitation, he plunged the blade into her chest and stomach, over and over again, nearly 100 times. The brutality was staggering. And when it was over, Ashley was gone. But Jack wasn't done. In the aftermath of his horrifying act, he updated his social media profile picture, choosing a photo of himself and Ashley, as if they were still a happy couple. Below it, he wrote two chilling words, "Always mine." It was a grotesque declaration of ownership over the woman he had just murdered. Then, as if trapped in a twisted moment of remorse, Jack recorded a video message for Haley, a mutual friend. His voice was eerily calm as he expressed his love for Ashley, apologized, and confessed that he simply couldn't let her go. He admitted that his mind was fractured, unstable. But the video was never sent. Instead, Ashley's lifeless body lay beside him, an unspoken testament to the horror he had unleashed. Meanwhile, across town in Vernon, Ashley's family was beginning to sense that something was terribly wrong. Their phones buzzed relentlessly, flooded with messages from Ashley that they had missed earlier in the night. Panic set in. They immediately reached out to Jamie Ashworth, a trusted family friend from their Mormon community in Chelmsford. Without hesitation, Jamie, along with another church acquaintance, Tyler Borden, rushed to Jack's apartment in England. They knocked. No answer. They knocked again, harder. Silence. A creeping dread filled the air. When no one came to the door, they had no choice but to call the police before leaving the scene. But inside that apartment, Jack was trying to cover his tracks. He grabbed Ashley's phone and began sending out messages, pretending to be her. He texted her friends and family, attempting to throw them off the scent. But their concern only grew. The replies poured in, questions, desperate pleas, frantic calls. Jack ignored them all. Then, at 4:13 p.m., Jack made a call that sealed his fate. He dialed his sister, Nadia. And in a horrifying confession, he told her everything. But he didn't stop there, he turned his camera on and showed her the body. A moment of madness, or a desperate attempt to unburden himself. Either way, the damage was done. By the time the police arrived, just 10 minutes after Jamie's call, they were met with a gruesome scene. Jack was covered in blood, his hands stained with Ashley's last moments. He didn't resist. Instead, he muttered a chilling excuse: he had suffered a psychotic episode. The officers placed him under arrest on the spot and took him into custody at Chelmsford Prison. His trial date was set for September 7, 2022, at Chelmsford Crown Court. But there was never any real question of his guilt. The prosecution had an airtight case, a video confession, a trail of messages, and undeniable forensic evidence. Even Jack knew there was no escape. When the trial began, he pleaded guilty immediately. The judge, Edward Murray, delivered a stark warning: there was only one possible sentence for a crime of this magnitude: life imprisonment. But Ashley's family wasn't prepared for what they were about to learn in court. As prosecutor Simon Spence laid out the details, a far darker truth emerged: Jack had a history. A long, disturbing history of violence and crime, stretching back to his teenage years. And somehow, despite all the warning signs, Ashley had fallen right into his grasp. She had never stood a chance. Before the tragic events that took Ashley's life, Jack had a long and troubling history with the law. His rap sheet was extensive, riddled with multiple arrests for violent assault and even kidnapping. His temper was unpredictable, his actions reckless. It wasn't just law enforcement that tried to keep him away. Jack had been the subject of numerous restraining orders, including ones filed by his own mother and a former girlfriend. The revelation of his criminal past sent shockwaves through Ashley's grieving family. They had never suspected the horrifying truth about the man who had stolen their daughter's life. During the courtroom proceedings, emotions ran high. The prosecution laid out Jack's history in stark detail, painting a picture of a deeply disturbed individual whose violent tendencies had been ignored for far too long. The defense, meanwhile, argued that Jack's mental state had played a significant role in his crimes. But nothing could justify the pain he had inflicted. A letter written by Jack from prison became a focal point in the case. In it, he expressed remorse for his actions. He directly addressed Ashley's family, especially her mother and younger sister, Haley, admitting that nothing could ever undo the devastation he had caused. He claimed to have spoken to Ashley about his mental health struggles before her tragic death, as if seeking to shift some of the weight of his crimes. The letter was later released to the media by Judge Murray, who believed that transparency was crucial in cases like these. Ultimately, the justice system reached its verdict. Jack was sentenced to life in prison, with a possibility of parole after 23 years. The courtroom fell silent as the reality of the sentence sank in. Ashley's family, though relieved that justice had been served, knew their pain would never truly fade. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we unravel the haunting story of Jessica Pedette, a woman whose seemingly perfect life was shattered in the most horrific way imaginable. This is a case filled with twists, deception, and a devastating truth that no one saw coming. Jessica Pedette was born on December 15, 1980, in Pennsylvania. She grew up in a loving household, though her parents, Thomas and Danelle, divorced when she was still young. Despite the challenges of growing up in a split household, Jessica maintained a close bond with her mother. When Danelle remarried, Jessica embraced her stepfather as if he were her own blood, forming a deep and lasting relationship with him. In 1998, after graduating from high school, Jessica set her sights on a career in preschool education. She had a natural talent for working with children. Her patience, kindness, and infectious energy made her a beloved figure among the little ones she taught. It was during this time that she met Michael Pedette, the man she would later marry. Their relationship blossomed quickly. They moved in together, built a life, and welcomed two beautiful children into the world. They weren't perfect, no family is, but by all appearances, they were happy. After 8 years together, they finally made it official, exchanging vows in a heartfelt ceremony in August 2014. It should have been the start of their forever. But just 4 months later, Jessica vanished. At the time of her disappearance, Jessica had been working at a kindergarten in Northampton for 2 years. Her job brought her immense joy. She adored the children, and they adored her right back. On the morning of November 21, 2014, Jessica followed her usual routine. She dropped off her older children at school and took her younger son with her to work at the kindergarten. It was a seemingly normal day, with no signs of the darkness lurking ahead. Sometime during the morning, Jessica approached her administrator with a simple request. She needed to step out for a short break to send a fax to her mother's house, which was in a rural area outside Northampton. It was an errand she had likely done countless times before. The administrator approved, and Jessica left her son in the kindergarten's care before heading out. She never came back. Jessica's failure to return was alarming. As the hours passed and her phone went unanswered, worry began to spread among her co-workers and family. Something was wrong. This wasn't like her. Her mother, who had been expecting Jessica, never received the fax or saw any sign of her daughter. Panic set in, and soon, the police were involved. As the investigation unfolded, the truth that emerged was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. What really happened to Jessica Padette? Who was responsible for her disappearance? And why did a seemingly ordinary day turn into a nightmare that no one saw coming? Stay with us as we dive deeper into the chilling details of this case. What we uncover next will shock you. If you found this story intriguing, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode of our true crime investigations. Until next time, stay safe, and always be aware of your surroundings. Jessica had always been dependable. A loving wife, a doting mother, and a dedicated kindergarten teacher, she never left her responsibilities unattended. So, when she told her colleagues she'd be back in half an hour after stepping out for a short break, no one thought twice about it. But 30 minutes passed. Then 45. Then an hour. The minutes dragged on, and an uneasy tension filled the air. Her co-workers tried calling her, expecting to hear her warm, familiar voice. But their calls went unanswered. Jessica never ignored her phone, especially when it came to work or family. At first, they assumed she had gotten caught up in something minor, maybe a phone call, an unexpected errand. But as time stretched further, concern turned into alarm. The kindergarten administrator decided to contact Jessica's husband, Michael. Maybe he had heard from her. Maybe there was a simple explanation. But when Michael answered, his voice was laced with confusion. "No, I haven't heard from her. She hasn't called me," he said, already dialing her number as he spoke. But just like with her co-workers, every call went straight to voicemail. That wasn't like Jessica at all. Michael's hands tensed around his phone as a cold sense of dread settled in. He called Jessica's mother, Danelle, who was in Florida at the time. Maybe Jessica had reached out to her. But Danelle hadn't heard from her daughter all day. Her concern was immediate. "Call Greg," she urged, referring to Jessica's stepfather. "See if he knows anything." Michael did, but Greg had no information either. No one had seen her. No one had heard from her. Jessica had vanished. Danelle wasted no time, she booked the earliest flight she could to Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, back home, Michael could no longer ignore the sinking feeling that something was very, very wrong. He went to the police, his voice strained with panic. "My wife is missing," he told them. "She would never leave our kids. Something's happened to her." The authorities took his concerns seriously and immediately launched an investigation. They distributed Jessica's description to all nearby stations. Height, 5 feet 4 inches. Weight, 130 pounds. Distinctive marking, a footprint tattoo on her shoulder. Hair, brown eyes, hazel. Last seen wearing gray sweatpants and a black hoodie with "Duck Duck Goose" on the front and "Staff" on the back. Officers scoured local hospitals, checked morgues, and questioned anyone who might have seen her. But no one had any answers. Jessica had simply vanished into thin air. Detectives turned to her co-workers, searching for any clue that might hint at where she had gone. But everyone they spoke to had the same story: Jessica had been in good spirits. She had seemed completely normal when she left work. No tension. No strange behavior. No enemies. In fact, she was well liked by both colleagues and the children she taught. Nothing suggested she had reason to disappear voluntarily. Then, 2 hours after Michael had reported Jessica missing, police got their first lead. Her cell phone signal had been detected, roughly a mile away from the kindergarten where she worked. The location data wasn't precise, but it was enough to narrow their search. By then, night had fallen. Darkness swallowed the streets, and the air grew colder. Officers combed the area with flashlights, their beams cutting through the shadows. And then, they found it. Jessica's car, a white Subaru Outback, was sitting alone in a nearly empty parking lot. The doors were unlocked. The interior was undisturbed. Jessica's purse sat neatly on the passenger seat, her bank cards and documents still inside. Her keys dangled from the ignition as if she had only stepped away for a moment. And her phone, her lifeline, was lying right there, next to her purse. Yet, Jessica was nowhere to be found. The parking lot was eerily quiet. No struggle. No shattered glass. No blood. No immediate sign of foul play. But the presence of her belongings, left untouched, painted a chilling picture. Whatever had happened to Jessica, it had happened fast. The question now wasn't just, where is Jessica, but, who had taken her, and why? And more importantly, was she still alive? The discovery of an abandoned car in a quiet parking lot left Northampton police grappling with a series of unsettling questions. Where was Jessica? What had prompted her to leave behind her vehicle and all of her personal belongings, her phone, keys, and documents, so close to her workplace? Had she disappeared willingly, or was something far more sinister at play? To piece together the mystery, detectives turned to surveillance footage. A security camera mounted on the back wall of a small convenience store across the street had a clear view of the parking lot where Jessica's car was found. The store manager assisted as officers reviewed the grainy footage, their eyes scanning for any sign of what had happened that day. At precisely 1 p.m., Jessica's car entered the lot. The video showed her stepping out, lingering briefly by the driver's side door before walking away. She never returned. That brief, silent departure raised even more questions. If she had planned to leave, why would she abandon everything she needed? And where did she go from there? Determined to track her movements, detectives watched as the footage revealed Jessica walking between two buildings toward another parking lot. But just as they hoped to follow her further, she vanished from view, the camera's range cutting off just as she entered what seemed to be a blind spot. There were no other cameras in the area. That was the last known sighting of Jessica alive. With no clear leads, investigators made copies of the footage and brought it back to the station, hoping that a larger screen and fresh eyes would reveal something they had missed. Meanwhile, the Northampton Police Department, a small force with limited resources, reached out to the Pennsylvania State Police for assistance in organizing a search. Flyers with Jessica's photo were printed and distributed across the city, spread through social media, and aired on local news. The hope was that someone, anyone, had seen something that could provide a breakthrough. As state detectives joined the case, they began reconstructing the events leading up to Jessica's disappearance. They started at her workplace, a kindergarten where she worked as a teacher. Co-workers told investigators that Jessica had left that day with a specific purpose. She was going to send a fax from her mother's house, a simple errand that should have taken no more than a short drive. Following this lead, detectives visited her mother's house, located just 4 miles from the kindergarten. Jessica's mother wasn't home at the time, but her stepfather, Greg, and his wife, Danelle, lived there. The couple informed police that Jessica had keys to the house and could come and go as she pleased. However, on the day she disappeared, both Greg and Danelle had been away, Danelle in Florida and Greg at another location, meaning no one knew exactly what Jessica had done upon arriving. Curious about the fax Jessica had intended to send, detectives checked the machine in the house. But here was another dead end, the device wasn't working. If Jessica had needed to send the fax elsewhere, where had she gone next? And why had she left her car and belongings behind instead of taking them with her? As detectives expanded their search, they turned their attention to Jessica's husband, Michael. In cases like this, investigators always look at the spouse first. It was a grim but necessary reality. Many disappearances and crimes involve those closest to the victim. Michael had told police that he was the first to leave their home that morning, long before Jessica. To confirm his alibi, detectives retraced his steps and verified his timeline. Though nothing initially pointed to him as a suspect, investigators couldn't ignore the statistics. Too often, a missing person story ended with the involvement of a loved one. Meanwhile, Search parties scoured the surrounding areas, and local news stations urged anyone with information to come forward. But 48 hours had now passed, and no substantial leads had emerged. Desperate to uncover Jessica's movements, detectives began scouring the roads leading to her mother's house, hoping for more security footage. One key location, a nearby Exxon gas station, became their next focus. Would the cameras there provide the missing piece of the puzzle? Or was Jessica's disappearance something far more chilling than anyone had imagined? The gas station, positioned strategically alongside the main road leading to Jessica's mother's house, was equipped with multiple surveillance cameras. Given its location on Jessica's stated route, investigators logically deduced that if she had truly driven in the direction she claimed, she would inevitably be captured on video. Upon reviewing the footage, detectives confirmed Jessica's car passing by at precisely 12:56 p.m. The drive to her mother's residence was brief, meaning she would have needed to make a quick return trip to access a functioning fax machine, an essential task since the one at her mother's home was out of service. As officers fast-forwarded through the footage, searching for her car's return, something unusual caught their attention. The camera recorded Jessica's white sedan speeding through the gas station just 14 minutes later. But this wasn't a simple return trip. Instead of stopping or following the expected route, the vehicle cut through the station's lot and veered onto another road, heading towards the city center. This deviation was puzzling. A closer analysis of traffic patterns revealed a possible explanation. Jessica may have been trying to bypass a red light at the intersection by cutting through the gas station, a common, albeit illegal, maneuver. But this theory only held weight if she had been the one behind the wheel. Not long after, Jessica's car was discovered abandoned in a parking lot downtown. A police officer patrolling the area spotted the vehicle, and when investigators examined it, an even stranger detail surfaced. Jessica was petite, 5 feet 4 inches and around 130 pounds, but the footage from the gas station told a different story. The person seen exiting the car appeared significantly taller and bulkier. By comparing the individual's height to the known dimensions of the vehicle, forensic analysts estimated the driver to be between 5 feet 11 inches and 6 feet 3 inches. Then came another troubling detail, the position of the driver's seat. When officers examined the car, they noticed the seat was pushed forward, set to accommodate someone of Jessica's height. It was an uncomfortable configuration for anyone over 5 feet 11 inches. But when they rewound the footage, they noticed something calculated, something chilling. The driver, whoever they were, had deliberately moved the seat forward before exiting, creating the illusion that Jessica had been the one behind the wheel. So, who was this mysterious tall individual? Suspicion quickly turned to Michael, Jessica's husband. At 6 feet tall, he matched the general height range of the unidentified driver. Police wasted no time bringing him in for questioning. Michael, however, was calm and cooperative. He firmly denied any involvement in his wife's disappearance. He explained that he had been at work when he received the call from their child's kindergarten staff. To corroborate his story, detectives checked his alibi, interviewing his co-workers and tracking the geolocation of his phone on the day Jessica vanished. The results were conclusive. Michael had been at work during the crucial time frame. There was no way he could have been the person caught on camera driving Jessica's car. Days passed, and Jessica was still nowhere to be found. With Michael ruled out, investigators were left with a haunting question: who was the tall figure caught on surveillance, and what had they done with Jessica? Jessica's disappearance sent shockwaves through her community. Her children, left behind in a state of confusion and heartache, struggled to cope with the uncertainty. Despite relentless search efforts and widespread media coverage, the case remained at a frustrating standstill. Investigators combed through every piece of evidence, desperate for a breakthrough. One particular detail drew their attention: a grainy surveillance video capturing an unidentified individual exiting Jessica's car on the night she vanished. The figure's identity remained elusive, concealed by shadows and low-resolution footage. However, upon closer inspection, a crucial detail emerged. Exactly 1 minute after the unknown person disappeared from view, a white SUV, likely a Ford, pulled out from the parking lot. This new piece of evidence led the police to a shocking revelation. The vehicle bore a striking resemblance to one owned by Greg, Jessica's stepfather. Greg also happened to match the height and build of the unidentified figure in the footage. With mounting suspicion, authorities called him in for questioning. The request left Greg visibly stunned, his demeanor shifting from surprise to discomfort as he struggled to process the implication. During his initial interview, Greg insisted that he had nothing to do with Jessica's disappearance. He explained that on the day in question, he had taken his car to a service center for repairs, claiming a neighbor had driven him there to retrieve it. Afterward, he stated, he had stopped at an Exxon gas station to grab a bite to eat before heading home. But detectives weren't willing to take his word at face value. They obtained security footage from the Exxon station, hoping to verify Greg's alibi. What they found told a different story. Greg's vehicle was seen driving past the gas station just 2 minutes after leaving the service center. He never stopped. As detectives pressed further, Greg's story began to unravel. His supposed ride to the service center denied ever driving him that day, completely dismantling his timeline. The inconsistencies painted a troubling picture. Greg was lying, but why? Determined to uncover the truth, investigators turned their focus to Greg's home. A thorough search yielded several disturbing discoveries. The fax machine, which Greg had claimed was out of order, was in perfect working condition. Its usage history showed that Jessica had sent a fax from that very machine on the day she disappeared. Then, a chilling find, deep in the basement, officers uncovered a trash can containing napkins stained with blood. Greg's shoes, discarded in a dumpster just a block away, also tested positive for dried blood. Neighbors reported something else peculiar. Greg had requested an early trash pickup the day after Jessica went missing. At the time, it seemed like an odd but insignificant request. In hindsight, it painted a far more sinister picture. Investigators now believed Greg had used the early trash collection to dispose of crucial evidence, including cleaning supplies and rags that might have been used to cover up a violent act. With the mounting evidence, detectives confronted Greg once more. This time, their approach was different. They laid out the inconsistencies, the lies, the physical evidence found in his home. They told him they knew Jessica had been at his house on the day she disappeared. The weight of the accusations bore down on him. Greg shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His eyes darted across the room, searching for an escape from the inevitable. Then, after a long, tension-filled silence, he finally spoke. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he murmured, his voice barely audible. What followed would reveal a dark and horrifying truth, one that no one had expected. It was a quiet afternoon on November 21st when Greg pulled into the driveway, only to find Jessica's car already parked. The sight that greeted him inside was far more disturbing than he could have ever imagined, bloodstains smeared across the carpet. He would later claim that Jessica was already dead when he arrived. In a panic, he convinced himself that no one would believe his innocence. What he did next, however, only deepened the mystery. Greg drove Jessica's car to a city center parking lot, carefully positioning it to make it look as though she had parked it herself. Then, as if nothing had happened, he made his way back home. But as investigators would soon discover, Greg's story was full of glaring inconsistencies. Greg painted a picture of Jessica as someone who was drowning in financial troubles, claiming that her outstanding debts had led to her tragic end. But detectives weren't buying it. Their investigation revealed something far more chilling. Greg had gone shopping the day before Jessica vanished, purchasing adult toys. This revelation sent alarm bells ringing. Fed up with Greg's shifting narratives, detectives confronted him directly. They demanded to know where Jessica's body was hidden, warning him that an autopsy would reveal the truth. The weight of their words settled over him, and for a moment, Greg seemed to waver under the pressure. And then, he changed his story. This time, his confession was even more disturbing. According to Greg, the events of that fateful day unfolded differently. He claimed he was at home, watching adult videos in private, when Jessica arrived, asking to send a fax from his computer. As she stood there, unaware of the twisted thoughts brewing in Greg's mind, something inside him snapped. He described a sudden, overpowering attraction to his stepdaughter. And then, without a single word, he pulled out a gun. A single shot rang out, striking Jessica in the back of the head. The young woman never saw it coming. But Greg's heinous actions didn't end there. What he did next left investigators shaken to their core. After Jessica was dead, Greg didn't rush to cover up the crime. Instead, he dragged her lifeless body into the bedroom. He then did something that sickened even the most hardened detectives. He set up a video camera near the bed. What he recorded that night was so disturbing and grotesque that police struggled to believe what they were seeing when they later uncovered the footage on his computer. Only after filming did Greg finally dispose of Jessica's body. He wrapped her in a blanket and carried her to a ravine near his home, where he left her, discarded like she was nothing more than an afterthought. But Greg's world was crumbling faster than he could keep up with. Greg may have thought he could maintain his web of lies and deception, but the truth has a way of surfacing. He lost everything: his business, his home, his dogs, and even his wife. The only thing he never seemed to mention losing: Jessica. For Jessica's mother, Danelle, the horror of learning that her husband was responsible for her daughter's death was almost unbearable. In a heartbreaking statement, she mourned her daughter's vibrant and beautiful soul, reflecting on how Jessica's absence had made the world a much darker place. When authorities finally announced the charges, they didn't mince words. Jessica was a victim of homicide, and Greg was the predator who took her life. The district attorney, John Morganelli, made it clear that he didn't believe Greg's version of events. The evidence suggested a sinister sexual motive, something far more premeditated than Greg let on. The prosecution was determined to prove that Jessica hadn't died in the heat of the moment. She had been targeted, lured, and ultimately executed. As Jessica's family struggled to pick up the shattered pieces of their lives, Greg faced the full force of justice. He was charged with her murder, and investigators were certain of one thing: Gregory Padette wasn't just a man who had lost control. He was a predator who had meticulously planned the unthinkable. And he would pay for his crimes. Some crimes shake a community to its core, leaving a lingering sense of horror and disbelief. This case was one of them. A crime so twisted, so deeply unsettling, that even the most hardened courtroom attendees struggled to process the details. Tonight, we delve into the chilling case of Greg McMahon and the heartbreaking murder of his stepdaughter, Jessica. It all began on a cold Pennsylvania evening when police responded to a disturbing scene. Jessica, a bright and loving young woman, had been found lifeless, stripped of her future in the most horrifying way imaginable. The single fatal wound to the back of her head suggested that she never saw her attacker coming. But what investigators would soon uncover would send shockwaves through the justice system. Authorities initially entertained the possibility of an accident or an act of self-defense gone wrong. However, something was missing. Jessica's body showed no defensive wounds. If this had been a struggle, where were the bruises? The scratches? The truth was far darker than anyone expected. As detectives dug deeper, all signs began pointing to one man: her stepfather, Gregory McMahon. Under Pennsylvania law, Greg could have faced the death penalty for his crimes. However, there was a legal loophole: Jessica had already died before he committed the second part of his heinous act. Because of this, prosecutors were unable to push for the ultimate punishment. With no known history of abuse or prior criminal behavior, Greg's sudden descent into darkness shocked even those who knew him well. Investigators combed through his personal devices, searching for any signs of a secret life. Yet, nothing suggested he had any inappropriate relationship with Jessica, at least, not before that night. But then, they found the video. The trial began in 2015, and from the moment it started, it was clear: this was going to be an emotionally devastating case. District Attorney John Morganelli was prepared to prove Greg's guilt beyond a shadow of a doubt. However, Greg's own defense lawyer, John McMahon Jr., made a questionable move. He chose not to submit the results of a mental health evaluation. The reason? The evaluation confirmed Greg had no diminished mental capacity. This was no crime of insanity. This was a crime of pure, calculated evil. Then came the moment that no one was prepared for, the 6-minute video. The video, recorded by Greg himself, was crucial evidence that proved premeditation. It was brutal. It was sickening. But the jury had to watch every second of it before making their final decision. Despite the horror they endured, they delivered a unanimous verdict in just 6 minutes: guilty. First-degree murder. Desecration of a body. Life in prison, no chance of parole. Justice had been served, but for those closest to Jessica, the pain would never fade. Her husband, Michael, stood before the cameras, struggling to find words. His wife was gone. Their children would grow up without their mother. "She was the most wonderful person I ever met," he whispered, his voice breaking. In the meantime, Greg's wife, Danelle, wasted no time filing for divorce. Yet even from behind bars, Greg made the process difficult, dragging out legal proceedings and attempting to maintain control over a life he had already shattered. There are crimes that haunt the mind long after they're solved. Jessica's case is one of them. A trusted family figure turned predator, a community left in shock, and a family forced to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. Jessica's story is a tragic reminder that monsters don't always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes, they live among us. If you found this case as chilling as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. We cover the darkest crimes, the most shocking trials, and the stories that deserve to be told. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and keep the shadows at bay. Jassy Alvarez was a woman full of life, a devoted mother, a loving daughter, and a cherished friend. But behind her radiant smile and vibrant personality, she carried the scars of a painful past. Her relationship with Miguel Castro had been anything but easy. What started as love had quickly spiraled into a nightmare of control and violence. Jassy had wanted to leave Miguel for a long time, but he wouldn't let her go. His possessiveness turned brutal, and one night, in a fit of rage, he physically attacked her. It wasn't the first time. But this time, Jassy decided she had endured enough. Summoning every ounce of courage, she reported him to the police. The justice system finally intervened, and Miguel was sentenced to 4 years in prison. With him behind bars, Jassy tried to rebuild her life. She found solace in her work as a waitress at Del Frisco, a popular Boston restaurant. In her free time, she indulged in her passions, dancing and photography. But above all, she lived for her little daughter, Gabriella. Jassy adored taking her 2-year-old to the park, watching her giggle as she played on the swings, feeling the warm embrace of motherhood. On the evening of February 23, 2019, Jassy had reason to celebrate. It was her birthday. She decided to go out for a night of fun with her friends. She carefully picked out a new, eye-catching orange jumpsuit, eager to step out feeling confident and carefree. Before leaving, she kissed Gabriella goodnight and left her in the loving care of family. That night, Jassy and her friends headed to Venue, a nightclub in Boston's theater district. The air buzzed with music, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. They danced, they toasted to new beginnings, and for a moment, Jassy was just a young woman enjoying her life, free from the ghosts of her past. As the night drew to a close and the club's lights dimmed, Jassy and her 2 friends stepped outside. The streets were alive with the energy of other late-night revelers, some waiting for their rides, others disappearing into the shadows of the city. Her friends eventually went their separate ways, leaving Jassy alone. She never made it home. Her phone, once full of life with messages and calls, suddenly went silent. Every call placed to her number went straight to voicemail. Sunday passed. Monday followed. And still, no one had heard from Jassy. By Tuesday, February 26, worry had turned into panic. Jassy's father, Juan Correa, and one of her close friends rushed to the police station to report her missing. This wasn't like her. Something was wrong. the Boston police launched an immediate investigation. Their first task, figure out where Jassy had gone after leaving the nightclub. Time was of the essence. Flyers with Jassy's face were distributed all over the city, plastered on street poles and storefronts. Her friends were questioned, but none of them knew what had happened after she said goodbye outside the club. Jassy had planned to head home, but she never arrived. Then, a break in the case, the detectives reviewed surveillance footage from cameras positioned inside and outside the nightclub. The grainy black and white footage painted an ominous picture. At 2:14 a.m., Jassy was seen standing on Tremont Street, near the nightclub entrance. She was talking to several people, swaying slightly, appearing intoxicated. Then, she made a mistake that would seal her fate. She got into an Uber she hadn't ordered. The driver, clearly irritated by the mix-up, argued with her. Their exchange was brief but heated. Finally, he lost patience. He forced Jassy out of the car, shoving her onto the sidewalk before driving away. Jassy, still disoriented from the alcohol, stumbled and protested. That's when he appeared. An unknown man approached her, reaching for her hand, pulling her aside as if he knew her. Perhaps he offered help, perhaps he pretended to be a concerned stranger. Whatever he said, it convinced her to stay. The CCTV footage showed a chilling detail: Jassy, unable to free herself from his grasp, seemingly unwilling or unable to resist. Seconds turned into minutes. The footage captured the man tightening his grip on Jassy, pulling her in closer. The city buzzed around them, but no one intervened. And then, they walked away together, disappearing into the night. Jassy was never seen alive again. The next set of security cameras would reveal where they went next, but by then, it was already too late. Jassy Alvarez's birthday night had started with laughter and celebration. It ended in mystery and horror. And somewhere in the city, a predator had taken her away, without a trace. The night started like any other, a lively crowd, flashing lights, and the rhythmic pulse of music spilling out of the Venue nightclub in Providence, Rhode Island. But for 23-year-old Jass, it would be the last night she was ever seen alive. Surveillance footage captured a man, later identified as 32-year-old L.S. Coleman, lifting Jass onto his back before carrying her to his car. The two drove off together, disappearing into the night. 14 minutes later, a missing person report was filed, and the police were left with urgent questions. Who was this man? Where had he taken Jass? And more importantly, was she still alive? It didn't take long for authorities to identify the mystery man as Louis Coleman, a seemingly unremarkable individual from a well-off family. With a master's degree in physics and no prior criminal record, there was little in his background to suggest he was capable of violence. However, one key detail stood out: Louis didn't own a car. But his mother, a California resident, did. She was the registered owner of a 2016 red Buick, a vehicle that perfectly matched the one seen in the security footage the night Jass vanished. By the time investigators reached Louis's apartment in Providence, about 50 miles from the club, he was already gone. However, CCTV footage from the building revealed unsettling evidence. The drive from the nightclub to his residence typically took an hour, yet Louis didn't arrive home until 4:15 a.m., nearly 2 hours after he was last seen with Jass. The discrepancy suggested an unaccounted-for stop along the way. The following morning, Louis sent an email to his colleague, stating he would be taking a few more days off. Authorities believe this was his attempt to buy time, to cover his tracks. Over the next 2 days, Louis's movements became even more suspicious. While police combed through security footage, family and friends desperately searched for Jass, distributing flyers and pleading for answers. Meanwhile, Louis was making purchases that hinted at something sinister. On February 26, the same day Jass's father reported her missing, Louis stopped at a Walmart. His receipt showed an unusual list of items: protective suits, duct tape, electrical tape, candles, gloves, safety goggles, a mask, and Clorox bleach. A chilling shopping list, one that painted a picture of premeditation and cleanup rather than panic. The following day, as the search for Jas intensified, Lewis returned to Walmart. This time, surveillance cameras caught him purchasing a large suitcase and a canister. At 9:58 p.m., he was seen wheeling the new suitcase back into his apartment. Just hours later, at 2:15 a.m. on February 28, more footage showed Lewis struggling to lift the heavy suitcase into the trunk of his car. Whatever was inside, it was cumbersome. Too heavy for a man who had moved so effortlessly just days before. At this point, police had enough evidence to obtain a search warrant for Lewis's apartment. When they entered his unit, what they found sent a chill down their spines. Among his belongings were 2 packages of hooded coveralls and 2 respirator masks, indicators of an attempt to avoid leaving forensic evidence. A sofa in the apartment was missing one of its 4 large cushions. Outside, in a nearby dumpster, authorities found items that only deepened their suspicions: white trash bags, plastic sheets, men's jeans stained with bleach, a belt, a white nylon hooded coverall, baking soda, safety goggles, duct tape packaging, and an empty car air freshener package. Then, on the afternoon of February 28, just as police were closing in, Lewis was stopped while driving near Wilmington, Delaware, nearly 350 miles from where the nightmare began. Officers approached his vehicle, weapons drawn, demanding he exit the car. Lewis barely hesitated before muttering 4 chilling words. "She's in the trunk." Inside, wrapped in a sofa cushion cover and a black trash bag, stuffed into the suitcase he had carried into his apartment just days before, was the lifeless body of Jas Correa. Forensic experts examining the vehicle found cracks on the passenger side windshield, suggesting a violent struggle inside the car. During questioning, Lewis wore a large bandage on the right side of his face, a detail he brushed off as nothing significant. But further investigation revealed the horrifying truth. Jas had suffered both strangulation and blunt force trauma before her death. DNA analysis confirmed the presence of Lewis's DNA beneath her fingernails, indicating she had fought back. Seminal fluid was also found on her body, confirming the assault. While authorities couldn't determine whether Jas had died in the car or inside Lewis's apartment, one thing was certain: her fate had been sealed the moment she left the nightclub with him. On March 9, 2019, friends, family, and community members gathered at St. Peter's Parish in Dorchester to say their final goodbyes. Many wore white, a symbol of purity and peace, as they mourned the loss of a life stolen too soon. As for Lewis Coleman, his attempt to outsmart law enforcement failed. The evidence was damning, the timeline airtight, and the surveillance footage undeniable. He now faces the full weight of justice for the brutal murder of Jas Correa, another tragic reminder that sometimes, the most dangerous monsters are the ones who blend in the best. The crowd was a sea of sorrow and solidarity, faces etched with grief, as they gathered in remembrance of Jassy Maka. T-shirts, sweatshirts, and banners bore her face, alongside a powerful message: justice for Jassy. Her name, now a rallying cry, echoed through the streets as the community came together to mourn, to remember, and to demand justice. DeAndre, Jassy's cousin and best friend, stood before them, his voice thick with emotion as he delivered the first eulogy. "We may never understand why Jassy's life was cut short," he said, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, "but I have faith that her death was not in vain. I trust that God has a plan, and I hold on to that faith." Boston Mayor Marty Walsh took to the podium, addressing the heartbroken assembly. He vowed to work tirelessly toward a future where young women could go out and celebrate without fear, where they could return home safely to their loved ones. He acknowledged the immense suffering of Jassy's family and assured them that the city stood with them in their quest for justice. Jassy's father, his voice cracking with pain, expressed gratitude to the law enforcement agencies who had worked around the clock to investigate his daughter's disappearance and murder. His final words were a heartbreaking farewell: "Rest in paradise, my dear Jassy. Rest in peace, my sweet child." But even as the community grieved, the pursuit of justice pressed on. Louis Coleman, the man accused of robbing Jassy of her future, faced charges of kidnapping resulting in death, a crime that carried the possibility of a life sentence or even the death penalty. However, prosecutors made it clear they would not seek capital punishment. In court, the prosecution presented chilling evidence. Surveillance footage showed Coleman dragging Jassie's lifeless body into his apartment. His online search history painted a damning picture. Queries such as, "Can a person fit inside a suitcase?" and "How to remove a tooth that isn't loose?" dominated his recent internet activity. FBI agents detailed his disturbing digital footprint in the days following Jassie's disappearance, leaving little doubt about his intentions. Yet, Coleman's defense team fiercely contested the charges. They argued that the prosecution was focusing too much on his actions after Jassie's death rather than proving the kidnapping itself. "This case is not about how Mr. Coleman behaved after her passing," defense attorney David stated. "The government's evidence leans heavily on those details, but they are not the crux of whether a kidnapping occurred." Court documents painted two conflicting narratives. What was certain, however, was that Jassie and Coleman were in the same nightclub that fateful night. Witnesses saw Coleman engaging with another woman, exchanging numbers and texting her throughout the evening. Yet somehow, it was Jassie who ended up in his car. Prosecutors argued that Coleman lured her in under the guise of offering a ride home, only to end her life. The defense countered with a different version. Jassie, after being ejected from an Uber, was distressed and aggressive, initiating an altercation with Coleman that tragically spiraled out of control. One of the most contentious aspects of the case was the weight disparity. Coleman, at 200 pounds, claimed self-defense against Jassie, who weighed just 119 pounds. Prosecutors dismissed this argument outright, citing the autopsy report, which revealed that Jassie had multiple substances in her system in addition to alcohol. The defense insisted this pointed to an impaired state that could have led to erratic behavior, but the jury saw things differently. After months of legal battles, in June 2022, the verdict was delivered. Louis Coleman was found guilty of kidnapping resulting in death. The defense scrambled to overturn the decision, filing motions challenging the sufficiency of the evidence, but the judgment remained firm. By October 2022, Coleman, 36, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court ordered him to pay $60,000 in restitution to Jassie's family, a sum that could never compensate for the void he had left behind. While one chapter closed, another case loomed, shrouded in darkness and heartbreak. It was the case of Bobby Ann McLeod, a young woman full of life, whose tragic disappearance sent shockwaves through her community. Bobby Ann was a bright, spirited 18-year-old who lived with her parents, Donna and Adrian, and her brother, Lee, in Plymouth, a picturesque coastal town in southwest England. On November 20, 2021, she left home around 5:45 p.m., walking the short distance to the bus stop on Sheepster Road. She had plans to meet her boyfriend and friends in town, a routine outing she had done countless times before. But this time, she never made it. When Bobby Ann failed to respond to her mother's texts, Donna felt a gnawing sense of unease. Calls went unanswered. Hours passed. Then, her boyfriend reached out. Bobby Ann had never shown up. Panic set in as her parents called her friends, but no one had seen or heard from her. At 9 p.m., with dread settling in their bones, the McLeods reported their daughter missing. The next morning, police, family, and volunteers launched a desperate search. Flyers bearing Bobby Ann's face flooded the city. Social media buzzed with pleas for information. Lee, her brother, posted a heartbreaking message online, begging anyone with knowledge of her whereabouts to come forward. But as the hours stretched into days, hope began to wane, and an unsettling truth emerged: something terrible had happened to Bobby Ann McLeod. The entire town of Plymouth rallied together in a desperate attempt to find her. Flyers were posted, social media flooded with pleas, and volunteers combed the streets. The message was clear: if anyone had seen Bobby Ann, if anyone had the slightest piece of information, they needed to come forward. Her family, shattered and clinging to hope, urged the public to help bring their beloved daughter home. As the police investigation unfolded, disturbing details emerged. Bobby Ann had made plans to take the bus downtown, yet, for reasons unknown, she never boarded. Witnesses recalled seeing her at the bus stop that evening, waiting alone in the dim streetlight glow. Then, she was gone. The mystery deepened when a local resident stepped forward, confirming he had seen Bobby Ann at the stop. Her presence there was indisputable. But why hadn't she taken the bus? And where had she gone instead? A chilling discovery came soon after. In a walkway behind the bus stop, officers found her wireless headphones abandoned on the ground. A wave of dread washed over the investigators. The area was immediately sealed off, and forensic teams meticulously combed through every inch of the surrounding streets, hoping to uncover even the smallest clue that might explain her disappearance. Suspicions of foul play grew stronger. With no signs of voluntary departure, authorities feared the unthinkable. Bobby Ann had been kidnapped. Investigators tracked her phone's signal within the city limits, but it remained elusive. Every call made to her number rang unanswered, each one met with an ominous silence before going straight to voicemail. Days passed with no progress, each hour stretching painfully for Bobby Ann's loved ones. Then, on November 22, police received the break they had feared. A woman's body had been found at Babazan Beach, approximately 8 miles from the bus stop. Hidden away in a secluded wooded area near the shore, half a mile inland, lay the lifeless body of Bobby Ann McLeod. Grief crashed over the community like a tidal wave. The news shattered her family, who had clung to the hope that she might be found alive. A vigil was held in her honor near the very bus stop where she was last seen, the place where, unknowingly, she had spent her final moments of freedom. Her mother, Donna, stood before a crowd of mourners, her voice heavy with sorrow yet filled with gratitude for those who had supported them through the darkest days of their lives. Though our beautiful Bobby Ann was taken from us, she will never be forgotten, she vowed. Her brother, Lee, paid a touching tribute, sharing a childhood photograph of them in their school uniforms, smiling in a moment of innocence long before tragedy found them. Alongside the image, he wrote words that cut through the heart: "You didn't deserve this. You were a beautiful, talented girl. I was lucky to have you as my little sister. I'll cherish every adventure we had together. Rest easy now." The investigation into Bobby Ann's death uncovered harrowing details. Her body, found naked, bore no evidence of sexual assault, but the brutality she had endured was undeniable. 14 deep lacerations marred her head and face, wounds inflicted with monstrous force. The search for her killer had reached its critical moment. Then, an unexpected turn. On November 23, the very day Bobby Ann's body was discovered, a man walked into the police station at 1:17 p.m. He approached the officers, offering to provide information on the missing girl, claiming he wanted to assist the investigation. His name was Cody Ackland, a 24-year-old local musician, the lead guitarist of an indie rock band. A charming young man on the surface, but beneath that persona, he concealed a darkness few had glimpsed. Cody's confession sent shockwaves through the investigation. He admitted everything: kidnapping, the brutal attack, and the murder of Bobby Ann. He had never met her before that fateful night. She was a stranger. A random victim. As investigators delved into Cody's past, they uncovered a disturbing obsession. He had long been fascinated by serial killers, idolizing some of the most notorious murderers in history: Joseph DeAngelo Jr., Andre Chikatilo, Ivan Milat, Fred West, and Tommy Lynn Sells. But above all, he revered Ted Bundy. His admiration for the infamous killer seeped into every aspect of his life. When police searched his phone, they found 3,216 images, many of them macabre, disturbing, and eerily reminiscent of horror films. In the days leading up to Bobby Ann's murder, Cody's internet history revealed a mind consumed by dark thoughts. His searches fixated on serial killers, remote locations in Dartmoor, potential murder weapons, and online stores selling baseball bats, ski masks, and waterproof clothing. It was as if he had been preparing for this moment, waiting for the right opportunity. That opportunity came on the evening of November 20th. Bobby Ann arrived at the bus stop at 6:15 p.m., unaware that her life was about to intersect with pure evil. Cody was driving in the area when he spotted her. She was alone. Vulnerable. He saw his chance. Pulling his Ford Fiesta behind the bus stop, he watched her for minutes, ensuring the coast was clear. Then, he made his move. Armed with a hammer he had purchased beforehand, he crept toward Bobby Ann. Before she could react, he struck 2 swift blows to her head. She collapsed. Believing she was dead, Cody hurried back to his car. But as he drove away, something made him glance in his rearview mirror. Horror struck, Bobby Ann was still alive. She was moving. Fighting to get up. He couldn't let her escape. Turning the car around, he returned to the scene, picked up her battered, semi-conscious body, and stuffed her into his vehicle. For the next 20 miles, he drove with his victim bleeding beside him, her life slipping away as he made his way toward the isolated darkness of Dartmoor. What happened next was even more chilling. Cody drove deep into the wooded area, his mind racing, his breath heavy. His plan had been simple: leave Bobby Ann's body there and disappear into the night. But as he opened the car door, a chill ran down his spine. She was still alive. Conscious. For a moment, time seemed to stretch impossibly thin. She was looking at him, scared, her breath ragged. She must have thought, for just a fleeting second, that she had a chance. That maybe he would change his mind, that he would help her. That there was a sliver of humanity left in him. But Cody didn't call for help. He didn't rush her to a hospital or try to undo what he had started. Instead, he helped her out of the car, his hands steady despite the storm raging in his head. When she whispered her fear, her voice weak but full of desperation, he met her gaze and admitted the truth: he was scared too. This was new to him. He had never done something like this before. Then, with a hammer in his hand, he struck her. Once. Twice. Again and again, 12 times in total, each blow a desperate attempt to silence the evidence of his crime. But Bobby Ann refused to let go. Even after the brutality she had endured, she made a sound, small, pained, but defiant. Cody, stunned by her resilience, hesitated. She was still holding on. He had one last chance to stop. One last moment where he could have saved her life. Instead, he convinced himself that he was doing her a favor. Ending her suffering, he would later claim. And so, he placed her body in the trunk of his car, driving 30 miles to Bavant, where the trees would swallow his secret. He stripped her of her shoes, clothing, and jewelry, as if erasing her existence could undo what he had done. Then, he returned home, slipping into his bed as though the night had been nothing more than a bad dream. The following day, Cody traveled to Tamerton Foliot, north of Plymouth, carrying with him the last physical traces of his crime. He stood at the River Tamar, gripping the hammer that had ended Bobby Ann's life, before tossing it into the dark waters below. It sank without a trace. The bag containing their blood-stained clothes met a similar fate, discarded in a nearby allotment on Coombe Lane. Despite the authorities' desperate search, the hammer was never recovered. On November 21st, as police and volunteers combed the area for any sign of Bobby Ann, Cody was out socializing. He laughed with his friends at a pizza gathering, played music at a band rehearsal, and ended the night at a pub, unusually cheerful. Those around him noticed the shift. He was happier, more affectionate than ever. The next day, November 22nd, he indulged himself further, buying popcorn and settling into a movie theater seat, seemingly unbothered by the search parties scouring the countryside for the girl he knew would never be found alive. Meanwhile, he kept up with the latest news on his phone, watching the investigation unfold as though it were just another story. Then came November 23rd. The weight of his secret must have become unbearable, or perhaps he simply wanted control over how it all ended. During his lunch break at the car service company where he worked, he sent a message to his music group, telling them he loved them. He texted his mother, the same words, as if tying up loose ends. And then, without fanfare or hesitation, he walked into the police station and confessed. The fallout was immediate. His bandmates issued a statement on Facebook, disbanding the group out of respect for Bobby Ann McLeod. They were in shock, their words filled with disbelief. How could the person they knew, the man who stood beside them on stage, be the same one who had committed such horror? In the days that followed, investigators found the physical evidence they needed. Bobby Ann's DNA was in Cody's car. Her blood was on his sneakers. By May 2022, the trial was set. His attorney, Ray Tully, revealed that psychiatric evaluations found no sign of mental illness. But Cody's past was marred by struggles, ADHD, dyslexia, depression, and anxiety. By the time he was 19, he had battled depression for 7 years. He had lacked support from his family, his school, and most significantly, his father, who had failed to provide him with the guidance he so desperately needed. But none of that changed what he had done. During sentencing, Judge Robert Linford was unwavering. This was not a moment of lost control. It was planned, deliberate, and merciless. Bobby Ann had suffered, and Cody had made sure of that. He was sentenced to life in prison. A minimum of 31 years before he could even dream of freedom. And so, while Bobby Ann's family mourned the life that had been stolen from them, Cody sat behind bars, the weight of his actions inescapable. The hammer was never found. But the evidence of his brutality, of the choices he made and the life he ended, would never be washed away.